Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose country we meet today. I want to acknowledge their care for the things of the land, the sea and the air, the things seen and unseen, and to pay my respect to their elders past and present. My name is Simon Longstaff. I'm Executive Director of the Ethics Centre, and I'd like to welcome you to the Bear Pit, which comes to you from the Legislative Assembly in the New South Wales Parliament, Australia's oldest parliament. I'm pleased to welcome you here with our panellists for today. Greens Member of the Upper House, the Legislative Council, Kate Fairman, the Minister for Finance and Natural Resources, the Honourable Courtney Houssos, welcome. The Shadow Minister for Health, Matt Kean, the former Speaker from this House and the person who originated this program events, the Honourable Jonathan O'Dea, and Ashleigh, who is currently serving as APC's political reporter for this upper place, but has just been appointed as the National Political Editor for Network 10. A tremendous accomplishment, and the first woman I understand to be a National Political Editor for an Australian television network. Please join with me in welcoming them. Now, this is a live streamed event, so if you're online, you can actually send in questions, and later on they'll pop up here and I'll be able to put them to our panel. Not everybody in the audience is going to be able to see everything. If you're in the upper reaches, you won't be able to see right down, and you won't be able to pose questions from there. But down here on the lower floor, if you have a question later on when the time comes up, there'll be microphones which will come to you to enable you to do so. So with those various limitations in mind for those who can and cannot see everything that's going on, let's get underway. The purpose of these sessions, initiated by Jonathan, is to provide an opportunity for the people of New South Wales to get some insight, not just to the day-to-day politics, but to the people who are behind the politics, the human dimension of what goes on behind the scenes. Now, today's topic is about victory and defeat, and I just want to begin starting with you, Kate. If you could just perhaps give us a bit of an outline that in your life, what has been your sweetest victory and perhaps your most bitter defeat?
Yes, okay. Hi everybody, great to be here. I was thinking about this in terms of whether I had any examples to give prior to politics, and I really wanted to give one that was, in my childhood or my school or university, and I actually didn't and don't have one. And there's a reason for that in terms of my childhood and at school and university. I did okay, but wasn't a super high achiever. I was expelled from high school. I had parents...
Hang on, what for? Don't just skip over that. Tell us why you were expelled.
I snuck out with friends, and the nuns caught us coming back from our boarding school at 5 a.m. after probably drinking alcohol. There may have been a bit of that, and we pretended that we were going for a jog, and it was 5 a.m. but we were in jeans and a big woolly jumper, so that didn't work.
Right, good.
And I had my parents probably weren't the most supportive. My mother unfortunately struggled with horrendous accident and drug addiction, opioid drug addiction. So I wasn't one of those would-be politicians that had the family and the support and mentors, and so I was quite lost through my 20s and had no idea what I wanted to do. So I didn't get into politics until almost 30 in terms of the Greens. And so when eventually I ran for pre-selection, this was 10 years ago, or what have you, I didn't have this body of support within the party. I wasn't part of, we don't have factions in the Greens, but if we don't have factions, but if maybe similar to, we don't call them factions, but I had no support. But when this pre-selection finally came, and I had my partner who convinced me to run, and a couple of people who I worked with on environmental campaigns convincing me to run for pre-selection when Lee Rhiannon resigned to run for the Senate to fill her casual vacancy, I had people say to me, Kate, you're never going to win. You're going to get third or fourth. You're never going to win. This person's going to win. That person's going to win. You haven't done this. You haven't done that. And I won resoundingly that pre-selection. And for me, it was just, I had finally done something that I had people kind of believe in me and support me and kind of say, she'll be great. So that was just incredible. That's my victory. I certainly hope that's not my defeat. But the defeat is similar. So political again. So 2013, I can't not talk about this, I was a Senate candidate. Had to resign my position from the upper house. I'm in there again now. But had to resign my position in the upper house, run for the Senate, and it was a good chance the Greens should have won a Senate seat, but it was that election when the Liberal Democrats were first on the ticket. They got that big ballot paper and they were here, and everybody thought they were the Liberals, and they got 8 or 9% of the vote or whatever it was and completely skewed the entire election result. And that defeat, I didn't realise I hadn't lost really in a significant way kind of anything. That was really, really hard to take for a few weeks, was really gutted. And so much so that I'm actually able to talk to other people now and candidates that lose seats because I kind of understand what it means. But yeah, it opened up heaps of other great opportunities after I picked myself up. But it was really tough, and it's just I'm glad I experienced it. I'm really glad I experienced it. But yeah, it was hard to do.
Yeah, I might come back later on to some of the implications of losing, including for those who've beaten you. Yeah. Courtney, how about you?
It's a really interesting thing to be considering. I mean, I obviously, as you've just said, I'm the new Finance Minister and Natural Resources Minister, so I think it's pretty clear that I am genuinely living my dream right now. This is incredible. This is more than I ever imagined, and it's just an amazing privilege and opportunity that is in front of me and in front of the government as a whole. I'm a bit like Kate. I didn't come from a political family. I was born and I grew up in Foster on the mid-north coast. I went to local public schools like lots of country kids. I came to uni in Sydney, and I got involved in campus politics. And I said in my inaugural speech that at the University of New South Wales, and I'm a passionate supporter of my alma mater, that was where I discovered that my passion could become my profession. And since then, I have been incredibly fortunate to spend most of my professional life working for my passion. But the idea, I often reflect on the fact that if someone had said to that kid in Foster High, particularly through those really tough early years of high school, this is where you're going to end up, I wouldn't have believed them. I probably wouldn't have even believed them if they'd said it to me a decade ago. So it is just remarkable.
Did you sail straight through, or did you have some bitter defeats as well along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was a bit like Kate. I was looking for, in my pre-politics life, for some kind of sort of bitter defeat. I think for me, it was probably more part of this same story, which is in 2019, we obviously lost the state election, the Labor Party lost the federal election. I was very involved at the time we have internal party processes now to directly elect our leader. I was really invested and worked really hard with Chris Minns as one of the candidates, and we lost that election, and I'd say I suffered a similar kind of thing as Kate talks about afterwards. We were so invested, we really felt like we'd been in Parliament for 4 years, we desperately wanted to win, we thought Chris was the best person to lead the party, and the rest of the party didn't think that, and so you pick yourself up and you find a way through that. The thing that I really clung on to, and yeah, I did the same, went away and had a holiday with my family. I was really lucky, but I turned around and I went, I'm incredibly fortunate because I'm a member of Parliament, and I might not be exactly where I want to be, but it's a bit like the Ryan Holiday, the obstacle is the way, right? The opportunity that was in front of me as a backbench opposition MP was that I could spend all my time following my passion, and I spent that on education. I really knuckled down. I was in a unique opportunity that I had. I was on the Education Committee of the Upper House. We had the Education Minister in the Upper House. I have some quite strong views that I prosecuted through that, and I found that incredibly meaningful. And I reflected at the end of 2019, in a year, I'd often joked I lost everything that I was involved with that year, but I think I was it changed my perspective in the sense that it also made me appreciate the incredible opportunity and privilege that I've had even to that point to get to be a Member of Parliament.
And Matt Kean, you must have been expelled from somewhere by now.
Many people have tried. Many people have tried.
Biggest victory, most bitter defeat?
Biggest victory was legislating the nation's biggest renewable energy plan. Being an energy minister in a coalition government, there's a special place in heaven for them, let me tell you. And we were able to do something that had brought down prime ministers and governments, and I think set this state up for a stronger and more prosperous future. And we did it not only by getting my Liberal colleagues on board, my National colleagues on board. I'm still trying to work out how we did that, but we did it. But we built a multi-party coalition with Labor and the Greens to actually affect real change for the state and indeed the nation. So,
And the defeat?
biggest defeat is, the biggest defeat I have felt personally was the recent election loss.
Right.
And I say that not because of its impact on me, but the responsibility I felt as the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party. There were a number of my colleagues that were friends of mine, I knew their families, that lost their jobs because I, as the Deputy Leader of the party, couldn't get the team over the line in the election. So the defeat hit hard because it had real consequences for real people, and also a policy agenda that I really believed in that was going to make our state even better. That's not to say the new government doesn't have a good policy agenda and they won't fight hard to make our state better, but when you've shaped an agenda, you've fought for it, and then it's rejected at the polls, that defeat is felt hard.
That's, I suppose, the unfortunate reality. Yours is the mirror image of Courtney's experience, really. How about you, Jonathan?
Look, in terms of life, I'd have to say my biggest victory is winning my wife's hand in marriage, right? But that set me up for life.
Yep.
But politically...
Note that at home if you're watching.
Politically, like Kate, when I won pre-selection, I won that, albeit by only 2 votes, with no factional support from any factional leaders. And that was
Did the narrow margin make it even sweeter?
Look, it made it very real. One vote is a win. 2 votes was, I wasted a vote. But certainly being able to do that without, as I said, institutional support with the grassroots members voting was important and quite satisfying. In terms of defeats, look, we all have defeats. I'm fairly philosophical about my many defeats, but I suppose what makes them bitter sometimes is where people who you may trust ultimately demonstrate that trust wasn't warranted, and that's what makes a defeat bitter.
So where defeat is the fruit of betrayal?
For me, yes. I don't mind losing if you fought well and had a fair fight.
Right.
But if it's not been as transparent or as fair as it should be, then that's what makes a defeat bitter.
Okay, Ashleigh.
I've really struggled with this because my career isn't geared around, winning or losing, which is probably...
Is it not? Isn't there a kind of a competition amongst
there
journos?
is. I don't like to operate, but I think, look, because I am leaving Macquarie Street and I've been here for a really long time, so I think I'm a bit nostalgic and reflecting on my time here. And I first came here, I first came as a state political reporter when I was 8 months pregnant with my second child, and I had a 20-month-old at home. So I just think it's nice when I look at it and my time here, I'm just really proud. I don't know why I'm going to get a bit emotional, but I'm really proud of what I've achieved in that time. And I think sometimes we don't take stock when things happen or moments. And so I've just, this week I've been looking back on my time and I just am, really proud. I think, I came back when she was 11 weeks old, and almost everybody within my office would see I would express milk. And I know, men, we don't like talking about this, but I would express milk. Almost everybody's seen, me expressing milk. I did it in the state budget so that she would have not formula, so she'd have breast milk. So all sort of the stress and all the things you go through in life, I've sort of lived my, the early parts of my family life here on Macquarie Street. So I'm just really proud that I've got to where I've got, just all the other stuff and life around it happening.
No, and you should be too, because I think you are going out on your own terms too. So looking back with nostalgia. Any failures?
No, I think...
Not even a netball loss or something like that crippled
No,
you for a month?
I think my biggest failures have actually been with my male relationships, but we don't need to. We don't need to.
Well, we've heard about expulsions. You might as well go with
some really bad moments there. But look, I think, as long as I always say they're all for the book, and there's been a lot of disasters in my life, and I always think they're all for the book. As long as, you haven't really hurt anybody or done it, still live by your code and with integrity. It's all your major failures. It's all for the book.
So you heard it here first. There is going to be a book from Ashleigh where she discloses all of her failed relationships. Courtney, what is success and failure in politics?
Yeah, I think that is a great question, and I think it's ultimately a deeply personal one. Like, politics is an art, not a science. And I think I really love Simon Sinek's book Start With Why, and I think that's how you ultimately will determine it for yourself, is what is the why that's driving you in public life? What is the reason that you seek to do this? And I think for me, I feel a bit, I think probably indulgent saying that my sweetest victory is becoming a minister, because I agree with Matt. I think it's not the opportunity, it's what you do with the opportunity. And
So what's the why for you is the chance to make a difference, is that it?
I think it's to make a difference and to make the most of the opportunity that I have the privilege to have now. I think that I don't have a specific... for me, I'm in the upper house in New South Wales. Most people don't really know who I am, and I'm really comfortable with that because it means I can go about my job, pursue the things that this amazing job that we get to do, and I still get to go home to my kids and my husband and be a suburban soccer mum on the weekends, which is fantastic. A little bit less at the moment, but that's I think ultimately who I am, and that's the perspective that I try and bring to public life. And I think that I think ultimately success and failure is determined in politics on your own terms, and I think you have to be prepared to define it for yourself. Before I was in Parliament, I was the country organiser for the Labor Party, and a big part of that job was working with our branch members right around the state, and I loved it. I thought I had the best job because these are our branch members who genuinely believe in the cause of Labor and probably won't ever get to serve in a parliament and probably won't even ever have a local Labor MP, but they believe in the cause so much. And that was my job, to work with them and to find ways. And one of the things that I did really early on was I said, at election time, I don't want us to define success and failure by winning and losing, because that's not a fair outcome. Like, some of these seats we have not held for 50, 60 years, sometimes never. But if the KPI is that you want to get your vote to a certain level so that you can run for council next time, or what is it that we're actually seeking to achieve? And so I think really having that reflective, what is your why? What is the reason that you're doing this for, and defining it, then that's how you can define your success.
So I think if I just reframe this a bit, you're saying that the why allows you to then take a broader perspective as to what opportunity you create to make a difference, if I put it in those terms. And it may not be here, it might be in local government or some other area. Do any of you want to disagree with that sense of it? You've got a different way that you think about success or failure in politics?
I think with the Greens, perspective is probably slightly different, although you did talk about building votes for councils and going around in your country organising role. But for us, we have to, part of our objective every time we set objectives for election campaigns, part of it is around, getting our message out there, sticking to our principles, making sure we can, because we know we're not going to win government yet, and we know that the vast majority of seats we run in we're not going to win in. So we have to have these other KPIs and objectives for success or failure. And for us, it's the longer term goal, of course, in terms of ultimately can our preferences impact in terms of getting somebody elected that's going to take climate change more seriously. Sometimes definition of a success for me in an election campaign is holding an event that 6 people come to, but we get one incredible new member and volunteer from that event that makes a big difference to that local group. And I think your definition of success and failure obviously starts from where you are and where you're positioned and what your journey is, how far you need to get. So for us, success are a lot of little things, but then failure, we have to be very careful with failure, because I feel like sometimes every time we don't win, for example, enough to influence climate policy, we've failed. We're here to literally save the planet, and that's not looking too good right now. So we assess I've just been to a Global Greens conference in South Korea with hundreds of representatives from Green parties around the world. We were like, 5 years ago, one of the speakers said, the future is green. The future is green. It has to be green. She was back. In fact, it was Christine Milne, former Greens leader. She was back giving us a very, very blunt assessment of how have we gone. I'm not sure how we've gone as Green parties around the world.
She thought hadn't realised that potential.
Because if we're in politics to, again, literally save the planet, make the world a better place, more equal, all of that in terms of social justice as well, that's our ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal isn't being in power, but that's how we get there. But so for us, I don't want to say we failed. We're doing incredibly well globally and incredibly well in Australia. Look at us in the Senate, look at us here in the Balanced Power now in the Upper House. But it takes quite some time to get to that level of success that we're after to actually realise the goals that we want to realise as a party.
Matt Kean, Australians love, or at least to some degree do, the myth of noble failure. It's basically incorporated into the Anzac Day story that here was a defeat by any name, but it was a noble defeat. It sounds like what Kate's saying is, well, look, we're trying our best, but we're not actually succeeding. Is there much room for noble failure in politics when so much might be at stake? If you believe you're going to reshape a state or a nation, whatever, suppose a candidate you've got who keeps on trying and they're fantastic, but they never win, but they've given it their best effort. Do you have to tap them on the shoulder and say, noble failure, but we cannot have that continue?
Well, of course there's, nobility in striving for something and, falling short, of course. But, we're in the results business here. What are our KPIs? Well, it should be about how we make our state, our country and our world a better place. And if you're not delivering those outcomes, then I think you're wasting your time in a parliament like this. I've got a young family. I had the privilege of being a minister. I spent a lot of time away from them. And what made it worth it was the motivation that I was having an impact. The budget I handed down implemented the biggest reforms to women's economic participation in the nation. We invested billions of dollars in childcare, for example, nation-leading stuff, because we believe that women shouldn't have to choose between having a career and having a family. So that's shifting how our economy works, shifting opportunities for people, and making, I think, our community and our country better, stronger and fairer. So that made the sacrifices that people like we make, away from loved ones, away from family, worth it. But if you're not getting those outcomes, if you're not making the country a better place, then you have to question whether that time away from your family is worth it.
I think it was quite similar to what Kate's saying. Sometimes I think as well in politics and running in politics that there is a bigger picture. I've done a lot of stories and work in terms of female representation and about getting female candidates and getting them in. And yes, they're not all going to win, or there might be a Greens candidate running in a safe Labor seat. But if everybody is a woman, or there's like 5 of the 7 candidates there are women, and the same goes from people from diverse backgrounds, those sort of things. So that is not about winning. It's about a shift and the bigger picture. And yes, you're not hitting a KPI and you're not winning the seat, but it's the overall look, and it is state shaping, nation shaping, shifting people's mindset, and that takes a long time. So I think that there are bigger picture issues around and how we measure the success of that, and it's really hard to then tick a box for that, but there is, in terms of running and not winning, but there's still benefits to that too.
Now, Jonathan, I could conclude listening to this, I've put a few bits together, we're in the results business. One vote's enough. You know, a number of other things. We're going to save the planet. That could be an invitation to adopt a approach to politics, which is that the ends justify the means. And I'm just worrying, I'm interested perhaps what you think about the ethical boundaries within which one practices politics, the tactics you employ. I'll get a view from you, and then I'll come back to you, Kate, because I know that we were talking a bit about this before. Maybe Courtney, to see if there's something that resonates in the ALP too. But how do you think about that? And particularly when you've seen, I mean, you've sat up in this chair and you've seen the games that can be played in this place.
Yeah, Simon, I suppose listening to the other participants, the observation I'd make is there's a difference between victory and success. You can win a victory, but still not be successful. And how you define success really depends on your perspective. Are you taking the perspective of a party? Are you taking the perspective of an individual? Are you taking the perspective of the public? And they will all have a different viewpoint and a different perspective in terms of how successful you are. So I think Matt's absolutely right. You know, the nature of our democratic system is you have to experience a victory in order to potentially deliver successful outcomes. And that's the reality of our democratic system. And so, yes, absolutely victory in an election.
But how do you set the boundaries of what you do then in order to secure that victory? For example, shaming an opponent with private information?
So perhaps one of the reasons that I ended up in the Speaker's chair rather than in another capacity was the way I went about things, which was less confrontational, less adversarial. There are some people who very comfortably can fulfil those roles in a way that I perhaps wouldn't be comfortable. And that's a good thing, because you need a mix of different perspectives and talents and approaches. But ultimately, the greatest judge in terms of how you act, perhaps ethically, because we all agree you have to operate within the law, are the public. And we're judged in politics on a regular basis by the public. And if you haven't, I suppose, behaved in a way that's consistent with what public expectations are, then there's a great remedy.
Just before I go to Kate, do you think public expectations are too high, too low, or about right?
Look, again, you could argue any of the above. But generally, I think the public aren't engaged enough to form an informed judgment. The people here today are obviously actively engaged and interested in our democracy, which is fantastic. But sadly, the vast majority of the populace don't engage enough in our democratic process and take an active interest in what's going on.
But we can't blame them. We've got to lead them.
Absolutely.
And we've got to explain and enter the debate.
Absolutely. We've got to engage. We've got to get them
why
to
they elect
participate.
us.
So it's not a two-way. Matt, you're saying it's not a passive thing.
It's a two-way dynamic.
No way. I mean, no one knows better than me how hard it is to carry a difficult argument. And I would front up on Sky News and take the hits from News Corp and front up to Ben Fordham interviews where I knew that I was going to get a towel up because I believed in what I was doing and I needed to be able to explain that to people who didn't agree with me respectfully, but I needed to carry the debate for those who agreed with what I did and those who didn't. And that's my job. That's why I'm on the big bucks. And if you're squibbing that, you're in the wrong game.
Kate, we were talking about apparently these really interesting debates that take place within the Greens about what tactics you will and won't employ, where you might have something which would secure a victory, if you like, by wounding another person. But you say, look, we won't do it, that's not us.
Yes. It's getting more interesting because the task is getting more urgent, really. And if you think, climate change, critical decade, we really have no time to lose before we, ideally get governments in place that will do what is necessary to act on climate, which for us is obviously phase coal and gas out by 2030. So we have always had this, part of our principles we're talking about is running a campaign that we can be proud of with integrity and what have you. There are dirty tricks that are played in, rolled out in the tight electorates, always really, by usually both major parties. And we have always, I'll say always, I shouldn't say always, mostly always, not done that and just gone out there with our message and letterboxed and yay, vote for the Greens. Here's a, you know, just like we are who we are and we just play it 100% straight down the line. We have arguments and not arguments, discussions now about, well, we should go harder. We should be, running this attack ad, telling these lies, spreading misinformation about our opponents. And
you should consider doing that.
Yes. To, like, we're in an electorate where we've got 7%, swing needed and we could potentially get there. And it's like, we've got to, come on, if this person gets elected, it could be the difference between us being in balance of power and the difference between us actually getting the change that we want. And is it worth us just doing this? Inevitably, we say no. Inevitably, we say no and we run that ethical campaign. But it's really interesting now because, 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't so urgent. And now I don't believe in winning at any cost. I don't believe in doing that. But, even saying that actually right now is interesting because I go, don't I?
Well, there's
in terms of the planet, maybe I...
Well, there's a very famous
let's
essay
do it, let's win at any cost.
There's a very famous essay called The Problem of Dirty Hands by Michael Walzer. It's part of a literature about people who exercise public power having to be prepared to get their hands dirty, up to their elbows in blood, in order to discharge a public good. Now, it's not something I'm endorsing because if you ever read it, it has a very chilling outcome because you have to insist on being punished for doing it too. It's
interesting. It's just because the Greens and Greens members usually are very nice, soft people who just, it doesn't fit with our nature generally to run the big, hard, nasty campaign. Now, really, that is a big part of it, yet I feel like we're carrying the burden in some ways of a lot of, of doing this incredible task.
See,
Courtney,
I find that really interesting that you're having that internal conversation at a time where we just, let's reflect on the last state election campaign where we saw both major parties and both major party leaders engage in a way that, I have to say, I was getting feedback the school drop off and it's soccer on the weekends saying it's just great that they're having actual discussion about policy. And I think that's, it goes a bit to Jonathan's point about why people aren't engaged in politics. I think we also have a responsibility to then say, we are passionate. And Matt, I first met Matt when I was at university. God, we don't like to say this, so it was more than 20 years ago now. And we passionately believe in different ways of doing things, but I deeply respect that about Matt and about my other colleagues on the panel today, that we might have different viewpoints, but we passionately believe in the opportunity that we have and that we want to do things better for the people that we are representing. But I think we also have a responsibility, and I think that's where the public gets a bit tired of politics or seeks not to engage. It's really interesting. I often end up having this same conversation wherever I am, which is, but isn't politics really dirty, or don't you have a lot of trouble? And but I'm passionate about things like the schools that my kids go to and the schools across New South Wales. I am deeply shaped by my experience growing up in country New South Wales and that sense of alienation and isolation that people who live across rural and regional New South Wales feel. And I think, but that isolation is also across parts of Sydney. I think and that obviously shapes my worldview and the way that my approach to public life. But I think if we have a responsibility to engage and to talk about issues and things that people care about, so if we break it down and it is about schools and about hospital, the school that your kid goes to, it's about the hospital that you're going to have to take your kid who's fallen over to, or has a temperature in the middle of the night to, or it's about the police that you're going to call if something terrible happens, or it's about those interactions that you have, then you quickly find that people are actually really engaged in politics and they actually have very strong views about it, but that's the part that they want to engage with you on. They want to engage with you on those issues.
Ashleigh Raper, I've been tempted just to glance across to see if you're rolling your eyes or something. You're an expert and disinterested observer. What do you think about, and not just, I'm not talking about, we may be very lucky with the people who are practitioners in this room, but when you observe politics in New South Wales, do you see it as this more virtuous form that we're describing here?
Absolutely not. I think the biggest takeaway from the election was how nice Dominic Perrottet and Chris Minns were to each other. And I think, look, the community really liked it. It was a really nice tone. That is not to say that there wasn't stuff happening beneath.
100%.
Underneath the surface, in terms of, there's always dirty tricks in politics. It's just how it operates. Yes, the discourse and the tone of the election was great, and I think that was good, but it still happens. Yes, it was.
And are you shocked by it when you see it, or do you just say that that's politics?
I think sometimes you become desensitised to it, but what I've seen time and time again in this place is when somebody, in a contest, or somebody is trying to tear somebody down, sometimes, especially within the coalition, within their own party, or from other parties, that they feel like they're on the side of right, like they cloak what they're doing because they feel right, and they feel like that this person shouldn't be in Parliament because of X, Y, Z. And
righteous indignation.
Yes, absolutely. And they cloak what they're doing in this, when they don't have any regard for the collateral, or that it's not their story to tell, or that something's going to come out publicly. And I think that that's what happens. They get blinded, and that goes on all the time. And we did see that a case in the election.
Courtney, is there much compassion in this place between people who are pulled down and, or fail in their aspirations? Do you all, or when the cameras aren't watching and the journalists aren't there, do you sort of rally around and support each other across parties, within parties? How do people at a human level cope with the disappointment of being torn down in this contest, where somebody may actually believe they're doing it for good reason?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Ashleigh said is interesting about that kind of sense of you are so driven in your public life. And it's true, it's a bit like what Matt says, it's an extraordinary opportunity and privilege to do what we do. As a Member of Parliament, as a Minister of the Crown, it's extraordinary. There is a huge amount of sacrifice that is then required in order to fulfil that opportunity. I think that, Kate and I were reflecting as we sat down. We don't usually sit in this place. We sit over in the upper house, and it is a bit different over there. And we do have to work, particularly over the last 8 years, I've spent a lot of time on committees, various different committees, and I really do take a responsibility. Sorry, I think that might be my hair. I really do take a view that if you are elected to Parliament, then I try and find a way to work with people generally. And so that saw me working with Kate on various different health issues, or it might be, previous to that, David Shoebridge, who's now in the Senate, on building and on government grants issues, but then right across the spectrum. And my general approach, and I think that's the way the upper house is perhaps a little bit different, because the government rarely has, in fact, hasn't had an opportunity there had a majority there for decades. You do actually have to build those relationships, and it's natural, as in any workplace, when you've got 42 people in a specific place working together, that you're going to get to know each other on a human and on a personal level.
You're much nicer to each other in the upper house.
I was going to ask.
That's what we say.
Is it more combative, Matt, and less perhaps compassion down here in this place?
Than the upper house?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's like, what's compassion?
It is called the bear pit, isn't it?
Well, this is the bad pit. That's God's waiting room. I mean, that's...
I think we've shown that
I do facetious.
Seriously, do you ever look after each other down here and eat from across the aisle?
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Of course. But in here, it's knock them down, drag them out stuff. It's brutal. And I was the guy doing the knocking down, drag them out. Now I'm being knocked down and dragged out on the other side. It's horrific. But I mean, this is quite brutal in here, and maybe that was a culture for a time, but it's not the culture that's appropriate in a modern workplace today. So I think we as community leaders, as parliamentarians, need to think about how we make our forums, our systems and processes fit for purpose with modern society. What goes on in here would never be accepted in any workplace anywhere around the country. The idea that one guy gets there and screams at another person on this side, I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Can you see this moderating then?
Can I see us moderating it?
Yes. Is it changing?
Well, I think it is changing, and I think it is changing.
Ashleigh,
I think
you're going out soon, so just let loose.
It's glacial. It's glacial, but
yeah, the new Premier, okay, the first, Chris Minns, his first address, he stood up there on the government side and said that after the election that he wanted the tone of this place to change, and everybody was like, yeah, wow, let's do that. And then the next day, they came in to question time, the government, not everybody, but they couldn't help themselves, and that is because of the culture of this place, and it is the bear pit. Like, we're not calling it the
sand pit. It's not the sand pit.
Yeah. So then there were just, so I actually wrote a column on it at the end of the week that there were a number of new ministers that came up and made jokes and played the man, not the bull, when it was all about playing, talking about policy and not being personal, and they just reverted to form because they were in government, and so it hasn't changed. There is an opportunity to change because obviously the Premier wants that to happen. Mark Speakman is the opposition leader. He's a very different style of leader as well. But I just think there has to be such a big shift, and I don't know how people get there because everybody gets in here. I don't know what it's like. Matt, you're in here more. Everybody gets in here and something happens to them.
Let's be careful now, because we're about to go to questions. We have to see if there's some kind of viral effect. So is there anybody down here where we can put a microphone who wants to ask a question or make a comment? So all you've got to do is raise your hand. I can't see behind me. Is there anyone? Yeah, there's one. Yeah, okay. Let's start with that one person.
Mr. Speakers, I'm from table tennis, New South Wales. At the moment, we are very hard for the 2032 Brisbane Olympic Games. We are trying to put the tables in each school in New South Wales for more than 4,000. Would you please tell me whether our government can give us more support so we can have more tables in each school in the near future? Thank you.
So I think that might be a policy question about what the government might do.
Courtney's
I
the
don't
government.
think there's anyone in this
Just
room
say yes, Courtney.
who can answer that. So I'm afraid that is probably a question which is better directed to the Premier or a Minister.
Yes.
But unfortunately, those who can decide that are not here today. So perhaps we just register the question and take it on notice. And thank you for asking it. Someone, I think, over here. Yep.
Thank you. Here we are in this bear pit, and we've just identified that it can be pretty gladiatorial even in here, very adversarial. How does it feel to be having this conversation now? Are you sitting here thinking, oh dear God, let's get on with it and get back to getting results? Or are you thinking this is a real pleasure and it's something that is nourishing, or something else?
That's a very leading question, isn't it? Who wants to have a crack at that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've got to say, the thing that really struck me when I was first elected to Parliament was I didn't realise how much legislation went through with both sides agreeing. And I think that's the thing is, I mean, the nature of it is we are in a competition. I mean, when I worked for the Labor Party, someone said to me, it's the only industry in which if you get 49.9% of market share, you're considered a loser, right? It's true what Matt said, we're in the results business, but at the same time, it is a competition of ideas. We are fundamentally trying to convince people to vote for us or to support our policy or to go with our way rather than the other way. And I think there is something inherently in that there is a sense of conflict. I think how we manage that conflict is really up to each of us as individuals. There is a sense of agency that you have. You are a member of parliament, you're a community leader, you're a representative. You can choose what your limits are and how you conduct that conversation and how you participate in it yourself. I mean, I would reflect that I do think it's a little bit different in the upper house, and maybe that's because just we have. I always find that really interesting about whether it's the architecture, whether it's the culture, whether it's the system that gets everyone there, whether it's the makeup, whether it's different people are attracted to the upper house as opposed to the lower house. I don't know, but I've actually really enjoyed the conversation today. But I would say that this is the way that often committee work works, and a lot of the other things that we do actually operate with great relationships across the chamber. It might not always be portrayed in that way on perhaps the little clip that you see on the news or the little bit that you tune into question time, but you can't get anywhere in politics without some level of collaboration. It's a team sport.
Yeah, and unfortunately the news never covers the collaboration, do they?
That is a lie.
Right into the spirit of it, Ashleigh.
If I just sit in...
That's probably unparliamentary language, I think.
Normally I sit up there like a pariah, the meeting is down. This is very
sometimes we'll sit
exciting
in committees as Greens members and ask very important questions, and I'm just rolling my eyes going, this is so important that this information gets out, and then somebody from Labor, this is when they're in opposition, will just go bam with this absolutely ridiculous question, but it's like, you just not Courtney, you've just done that for the news, and without a doubt that is what's on the news.
There's got to be something about
and there's a performative element to those, and we have bosses back at base who want it to be exciting. So yes,
I mean, you'd be seriously, if you sent back a whole lot of filings which were sensible questions being asked by the Greens, you'd be sacked. No, they'd say, "Where's the kind of this?"
bias.
I try and do a balance in terms of, yes, you want a bit of excitement up the top to make it engaging, but if things go on, and I've been allowed to do that at the ABC, I'm a big believer in policy and why it's important, and deconstructing policy to make it palatable to the public. And so, yes, that sometimes is boring. Maybe that's why not as many people watch the ABC News as they watch Channel 9. But, but I think they're really important things to put on the record, and I've been allowed to do that. But yes, sometimes we do like things.
You're off to Channel 10 now.
Yes, and I'm off to Channel 10.
Jonathan, you sat in the big chair presiding over it. What do you think about this in terms of the kind of conversations that can and take place, even in this chamber?
Look, there's a time and a place for everything. A rigorous confrontation has its place. Question time invariably gets far more attention in the media than all the other dynamics that happen in this place and around this place and in government. Some of them, like Courtney and Kate have said, around committee processes, enormously important, collaborative, very productive. A lot of the dynamics outside the chamber and outside question time are very different to the dynamics in question time. But for me, I think the observation you made, and that had been made, when the group as a whole, 93 members are in this place, the dynamic is quite different at question time to outside that time, in my observation. But how do you make the change? In my view, really, and I tried to...
No, do you want to make a change?
Well, I think, yes, you do want to make a change, not necessarily fundamentally difficult to make fundamental change to the adversarial nature of our democratic system. That's the way it's been for a couple of hundred years, and the reality is you're not going to change that easily, or certainly not in isolation. But how do you make a lasting impact and cultural change? I think it has to be made on an individual by individual basis, and that's one of the reasons when I was Speaker, and I've retired from that role now, in addition to very much promoting greater public engagement and participation. But particularly I had a program of trying to foster and promote personal and professional development of each individual parliamentarian. And there are various organisations that we work with, and I think a lot of parliamentarians have taken that opportunity to further get in contact with their inner selves and why they're here, but also help refocus and repurpose what their mission is in this place. And I think if you do that on an individual one-by-one basis, then you can affect also the group culture. But if you try and do it with 93 members in this place from that chair, you can come a certain way, but question mark, you don't want to neuter the nature of the opposition government dynamic, but at the same time, it has to be an overall group dynamic where each of those individual 93 members want to change the way that they will operate.
You want to slightly tame without killing the animal spirits.
Can I ask Matt a really quick question about this? So Matt, because you're the only one at the moment that's sitting in the lower house, and I'm genuinely interested because there's so many more women who have been elected at the election. Is that making a difference at all? Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. Okay, great.
So
Absolutely.
the question, if it didn't come through because the microphone might not have been up, is has the election of more women to the lower house here made a difference in terms of the conduct of Parliament? Matt, you're in it, so...
Absolutely, and for the better. And I say that as someone that is, as Jonathan will tell you, one of the most adversarial players in this place. I wouldn't... my approach to Chris Minns was different to Prukar, for example, when I was at the dispatch box. Very different.
Interesting.
You moderate your own response, is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I wouldn't even go there.
Right, interesting. Is there anyone else in the room that wants to ask? Yeah? Sorry? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is victory in this place usually at the expense of one's political opponents? And if so, why can't there be more bipartisanship when it comes to a contest of ideas?
Who are you directing that? Anyone?
Anyone.
Who wants to kick off with a response?
When there are good ideas.
Sure, great question. I mean, I do think, I guess it just goes to what I just said earlier, which is is actually, you might not see, but I think it's something, is it like 70 or 80% of the bills that pass through are actually bipartisan. Good public policies often, we have some different ideological approaches, but often we can find a way through it. This is where, particularly if you look at the upper house, often our committee reports are unanimous. One of the first really big inquiry that I was involved with was an inquiry that looked at reparations for the stolen generations, and I'm really proud of that work that we did. We had myself and members of the Labor Party, we had members of the Nationals, members of the Liberal Party, members of the Greens. It was chaired by a member of the Greens, Jan Barham, and then Fred Nile on there, like a huge cross-section. We came up with a unanimous report recommending that there should be some financial reparations and other reparations for our stolen generations. We made a really careful and a considered report that we all agreed with, and the government then adopted and is in the process of implementing. So I think there are some really big, complex problems that you have to find a way through. And some of it did involve compromise from both a Labor perspective and from a Greens perspective and from a government perspective, from a coalition
Courtney,
perspective.
a quick question from online. People are interested to know how people from different sides of politics rate the best achievements of their opponents. So from you, what would you say is the greatest achievement of the Liberal Party while they were in government, the thing that you most admire them for? And then Matt, you probably can't say because Labor hasn't been in there, but what do you think could be the greatest achievement?
That is an excellent question. That I can't. Maybe you want to throw it at Matt.
Is there nothing they did?
No, I mean, I think.
I
no. I could say that I think that in my shadow portfolio, there was a lot of work that was done to regulate the building sector.
Okay.
And that process was started under the previous government, and I certainly had some, what I would say, constructive criticisms about how they could do it better, and I think we're continuing on that work. But you see the work that David Chandler is doing in the Building Commissioner role, and I certainly advocated really strongly for him to stay in that role because I think that's a really important set of work that we need to be doing for the people of New South Wales.
I won't comment on the new government because they haven't been in long enough to get runs on the board, but I'll comment on the Albanese government. I think what they've done in putting sort of the architecture in place when it comes to helping industry reduce its emissions, like the safeguard mechanism, things like that, that will create, that will put industry, the economy on a course over a period of time to reduce our emissions whilst growing our economy. So I don't think it's a big bang, reduce emissions tomorrow thing, but they've put the architecture in place that can lead us there.
I've got one final question online, just a very brief response from each of you. Do you think there is enough space for failure in politics when the stakes are so high? Ashleigh? Brief response.
No, I think that sometimes it's very, very unforgiving.
Thank you. Jonathan?
No, there's not. People don't show enough courage, and I think the public would tolerate the odd failure if people were a little bit more ambitious.
Thank you. Matt?
I'm a crash or crash through kind of guy.
Yeah,
so
we kind of go with that.
I think that you're not going to succeed unless you're willing to be bold and brave.
Courtney?
I try and teach my kids that there's no such thing as failure, that you got to keep making mistakes, and if you're not making mistakes and learning from it, a failure is only if you make a mistake and you don't learn from it. So that's the...
Yeah, and it's the journey, the fight that you did, the campaign that you executed leading up to the final, whether you won or lost. It's everything you did before then and how you did it. So yes, we don't. We're not.
Ladies, thank you, Kate. Sorry I interrupted
You're right.
you. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this year's Bear Pit. Can you please join me, whether you're in this room or online, in thanking all of our panellists. Ashleigh Raper, the Honourable Jonathan O'Dea, Matt Kean, the Honourable Courtney Houssos, and Kate Fairman. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the New South Wales Parliament too for allowing us to put this on. So thanks to the Parliament itself and all the people that have done that. And with that, I bring this session of the Bear Pit to a close. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A better world. Well, ethics is central to our capacity to be able to make decisions that are good and right, and in doing so, to forge a better society. For over 30 years, we've been bringing ethics to the centre of everyday life. And with your support, we wish to be able to continue to do that for another 30 years. So I'd ask you to consider making a donation in support of our annual appeal, because together we can make better decisions and make from that a better world.